Hello, everyone. My name is Denim Diaz, and I am a senior studying political science here at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. For my thesis, I enrolled in the course American Struggles, Immigration and Mass Incarceration, taught by Professor Ross Sibby. My thesis is entitled Weaponizing Reproduction, an Analysis of Forced Sterilization as a Form of Eugenics for Migrant Latina Women. My project has an overall goal in answering the question, how has the practice of forced sterilization of non-white women, particularly Latina immigrants, enforced eugenicist beliefs in the United States? Through the analysis of Americans' attitudes towards immigration, particularly in the early 1920s, when sterilization laws were first challenged to the Supreme Court, I am able to also address the question, who is able to be categorized as a true American and who does not? Controlling reproduction ultimately means to be able to control who gets to define themselves as American, thus aligning themselves closer to whiteness. Distinguishing between desirable and undesirable groups of people with these differences, usually concerning ethnicity, race, and ability, gives power to eugenics groups who have fought tirelessly to achieve genetic purity and superiority. For some quick initial background, the United States has a long history of forcibly sterilizing individuals deemed as undesirable or incompetent. In Buck v. Val, a Supreme Court case, Virginia's sterilization law was brought into question. It decided that the forced sterilization of those being held in state institutions was legal. This was a win for Harry Laughlin, a leader in the eugenics movement and the creator of the law. In fact, his work was so influential that Hitler used Laughlin's draft to create his own sterilization procedures. Ultimately, the goal of this law was to prevent individuals deemed as feeble-minded or genetically inferior from being able to procreate. This, although painted as a public health concern, would save the government money. According to eugenics proponents, if these individuals were dependent on the government for their survival, allowing them to freely have children would be detrimental to the financial stability of the state. This rhetoric has had disparate effects on low-income people of color. There is this belief that, especially with women of color, that they are prone to having large family, many children, and then not being able to provide for their families. In fact, this is the basis that led to hostility towards Mexican immigrants coming into the United States. Mexican migrants were viewed as unskilled and impoverished, with the ultimate goal of coming to the United States to abuse our government resources. There have been movements, as still existing today, to protect our borders and our culture. People worried that schools would become bilingual and that eventually Americans would lose their established cultural identity. Although these fears were unsubstantiated, these negative viewpoints have allowed for the reproductive abuses of this group. Speaking directly to the impact that this has had towards Mexican migrants, the Madrigal versus Quilligan court case dealt with the forced sterilization of Mexican origin women at the Los Angeles County Medical Center. At the center, there were an excessive number of sterilization abuse cases, specifically towards Mexican and African American women. There were efforts specifically in place to limit the amount of children these women had. This often looked like inserting an IUD in women after giving birth, or having Mexican women commit to using some sort of birth control after they gave birth, and then not allowing them to leave unless they agreed to do so. These efforts would eventually escalate to the forced hysterectomy and tubal ligation of women of color in the hospital. This would occur after they had just given birth and would force women to sign sterilization consent forms while they were under the influence of their pain medication. These forms were not provided in Spanish, which was the primary language of many of these individuals, and sometimes they were even threatened with deportation if they did not consent. The courts ruled in favor of the doctors, stating that they were acting in the best interests of their patients. These efforts to control who can be viewed as Americans have even escaped past its own borders. Looking at the sterilization of Puerto Rican women, based on a 1965 study, a staggering one-third of Puerto Rican women, aged 20 to 49 years old, were left without the ability to have children. This is due to the United States' ultimate goal to assert their dominance over people on the island, and thus being able to eliminate a generation of Puerto Ricans who were, due to colonization, American. Through the use of policy review, literature review, and journalism, I've been able to show the connection between eugenics, immigration, and reproductive rights. Eugenics, which is viewed as a type of science, has had an extreme influence on policy outcomes in this country. Ultimately, this has resulted in horrific violations specifically towards women of color, and for purposes of the paper, migrant women from Mexico. I was inspired to write this thesis due to my interest in reproductive justice activism and the ways in which we can make the movement more intersectional, placing emphasis on the perils of people of color. Tying this together with my interest in immigration policy, I hope to have provided a cohesive understanding of the influence of eugenics on immigration and reproductive rights policy. These issues are so common today as well. This past September, there were reports of forced hysterectomy occurring at the ICE detainment facilities. We are not as far removed from this topic as we may think we are. Thinking optimistically, however, I hope this thesis will allow my audience to learn more about these intersections and have individuals think more critically about the ways in which harmful stereotypes and belief systems have influenced their understanding of the world around them. Thanks for watching.